Chapter 2: The Psychology of Money. If numbers alone determined wealth, the world would look very different. Every accountant would be a millionaire, every banker would retire early, and every overseas Filipino worker would come home financially free after years of sacrifice. Yet this is clearly not how reality unfolds. Money does not respond to formulas alone. Money responds to behavior, to emotion, and to psychology. This is why two people with the same income can end up in completely different financial situations. One builds stability and peace of mind. The other lives in constant stress, regardless of how much they earn. The difference is rarely intelligence. It is rarely opportunity. More often than not, it is mindset. Your financial life is shaped less by what you know and more by what you believe, often unconsciously. Long before you earned your first peso, you absorbed ideas about money from your environment. You watched how adults argued about bills, how emergencies were handled, how debt was spoken of, and how success or failure was explained. You learned whether money was associated with security or anxiety, generosity or guilt, power or danger. These early impressions settled quietly into beliefs, and those beliefs became habits. Many Filipinos grow up associating money with struggle. Conversations about finances are often tense, emotional, or avoided altogether. Money is talked about when it is lacking, rarely when it is working well. Over time, this creates a mindset where money feels like a problem to manage rather than a tool to master. Decisions become reactive. Fear becomes a guide. Short-term relief becomes more attractive than long-term planning. This is why financial education that focuses only on techniques often fails. Teaching someone how to budget, invest, or save without addressing the mindset behind their decisions is like teaching navigation to someone who is afraid to leave the shore. The knowledge exists, but the behavior does not change. In the Filipino context, this psychological layer is especially powerful. Family expectations, cultural values, and social pressures play a significant role in financial decisions. Many people feel torn between personal progress and collective responsibility. Guilt, obligation, and the desire to help can override logic. At the same time, fear of loss, rooted in stories of scams, failures, and betrayal, can prevent healthy risk-taking. These emotional forces are invisible, yet they shape every peso earned and spent. This chapter exists to make those forces visible. The purpose of this chapter is not to judge, blame, or dismantle Filipino values. It is to help you understand how your beliefs about money were formed, how they influence your daily choices, and how they can be reshaped. Awareness is the first step to change. When you see the patterns clearly, they lose their power over you. By understanding the psychology behind your financial decisions, you begin to reclaim control. You stop reacting automatically. You pause, you choose. You replace inherited beliefs with intentional ones. This is where transformation begins, not in the bank, not in the market, but in the mind. Before we talk about tools, systems, and strategies, we must address the inner framework that governs them all. Because when mindset changes, behavior follows. And when behavior changes, financial destiny changes with it. This chapter will guide you through that inner terrain, so that when you move forward in this book, you do so not just with knowledge, but with awareness, confidence, and self-mastery. 2.1: The Money Beliefs You Inherited. Most Filipinos did not learn about money from books, classrooms, or formal lessons. We learned it from life, from the people around us, from the tone of conversations at home, the worries we overheard, the jokes we laughed at, and the silences that followed when money became uncomfortable to talk about. Long before we learned multiplication, we were already absorbing money patterns. We watched how our parents reacted when bills arrived. We noticed whether money was discussed calmly or argued about in whispers. We felt the tension during emergencies and the relief when help finally came, often from borrowing, not planning. These experiences taught us lessons without words, and those lessons stayed. Many of us grew up hearing phrases that were meant to help us endure hardship, not realizing they were also shaping our financial limits. Wala tay kwarta, not just as a statement of fact, but as a recurring identity. Pagtiis lang, a reminder that suffering was normal, expected, even virtuous. Importante buhi, survival framed as the highest achievement. Ayaw pangandoy dagko kay sakit ra na. Dreams quietly discouraged to protect us from disappointment. Others heard warnings wrapped in fear. Investing, basin scam na. Caution born from painful stories, or moral judgments that blurred understanding. Rich people are greedy. Wealth associated with corruption rather than competence. These messages were not taught with bad intentions. They were shaped by real struggles, limited opportunities, and the instinct to protect. But repeated over years, they became more than advice. They became beliefs. And beliefs, once internalized, begin to operate silently in the background of every decision. By the time we reached adulthood, these ideas had formed a subconscious operating system. Not something we consciously chose, but something we inherited by default. This is why many people experience a strange inner resistance when they begin to improve financially. Consciously, they want progress, they want stability, they want abundance. But subconsciously, something pulls them back. A quiet discomfort appears when income increases. Anxiety rises when opportunities present themselves. Guilt surfaces when success feels visible. Thoughts emerge that are rarely spoken aloud. I don't deserve that much. What if I lose everything? What if people judge me? What if money changes me? Baka sabihin ng iba, hambog na ko. These are not logical objections, they are emotional conflicts. And emotional conflicts are far more powerful than lack of information. You can read books, attend seminars, and understand strategies. But if your subconscious believes that wealth is dangerous, undeserved, or socially risky, your behavior will always sabotage your progress. You may hesitate when you should act. You may settle when you could grow. You may unconsciously return to familiar struggle because it feels safer than unfamiliar success. These beliefs create invisible ceilings. They define how much you think is enough, how far you believe you are allowed to go, and how visible you feel comfortable becoming. They limit not just your income, but your imagination. The purpose of this section is not to blame your upbringing, your parents, your culture, or your faith. It is to help you see clearly what was passed down to you, so you can decide what to keep, what to update, and what to let go. Because until inherited beliefs are brought into awareness, they remain in control, and progress remains accidental rather than intentional. Transformation begins when you realize this simple truth. What you inherited was not a destiny, it was a starting point, and starting points can be changed. 2.2 Emotional spending versus strategic spending. Most people believe they have a spending problem. In truth, almost everyone already knows how to spend. That part is easy. What is rarely understood is why spending happens. And that question has very little to do with money. Spending is psychological. Behind almost every purchase is an emotion, sometimes obvious, often hidden. Money becomes the outlet, not the cause. This is why advice that focuses only on cutting expenses rarely works. You can restrict behavior for a while, but if the emotional trigger remains unaddressed, spending simply reappears in another form. For many Filipinos, one of the most common triggers is stress. Life is demanding, work is exhausting, responsibilities are constant. After a long day of surviving pressure, spending feels like relief. A small purchase becomes a reward, a way of saying, gikapoy ko, deserve ko ni. It feels harmless in the moment, yet repeated over time, this habit quietly drains resources meant for more important goals. Stress spending is not about enjoyment, it is about compensation for fatigue and emotional overload. Another powerful driver is guilt, particularly among overseas Filipino workers and breadwinners. Being away from family creates emotional distance that money tries to fill. Parents give more than they should, not because it is planned, but because it feels like love translated into cash. Over time, this creates expectations that are difficult to sustain. What begins as generosity slowly turns into obligation. Guilt spending does not strengthen families in the long run, it weakens financial foundations on both sides. Status also plays a subtle but strong role. In a society where success is often judged by appearance, spending becomes a way to prove worth. Phones, gadgets, clothes, and lifestyles are purchased not because they are necessary, but because they signal progress. Utang para sa iPhone, loan para sa laptop, credit card para sa lifestyle. These choices are rarely about vanity alone. They are often driven by a desire to belong, to be respected, or to avoid judgment. The tragedy is that status spending creates an illusion of success while quietly postponing real stability. Then there is escape spending, the kind that happens when life feels heavy. When stress, sadness, boredom, or frustration accumulates, buying something feels like a temporary way out. It distracts, it soothes. For a brief moment, it gives the illusion of control. But the relief fades quickly, replaced by regret or pressure when bills arrive. Escape spending does not solve the problem it tries to run away from. It only delays it. All these patterns have one thing in common. They are not about money. They are about unmet emotional needs. Money simply becomes the easiest and most immediate outlet. Strategic spending is different. It is not driven by impulse, pressure, or emotion. It is driven by intention. A strategic spender does not eliminate enjoyment, nor do they live in deprivation. Instead, they decide in advance what money is meant to accomplish. Each peso is assigned a purpose. Purchases are evaluated not only by affordability, but by alignment. Wants are clearly separated from needs, and decisions are delayed just long enough for emotion to settle and logic to speak. This is a critical shift. Emotional spenders ask, "Kaya ba? Can I afford this right now?" Strategic spenders ask deeper questions. Is it worth it? Is it necessary? Does this move me closer to my goal or further away from it? That pause, the space between desire and decision, is where financial power is built. When spending becomes strategic, money stops reacting to emotions and starts responding to plans. Progress accelerates, not because income increased, but because leakage stopped. Stress decreases, confidence grows. The financial trajectory begins to change, quietly but permanently. This shift alone, moving from emotional spending to strategic spending, can transform a financial life. Not overnight, not dramatically, but decisively. It is one of the earliest signs that a person is no longer controlled by money, but is learning to control it. And once that shift happens, everything else in the journey becomes possible. 2.3. The mindset of wealth builders. There is a common belief that people who build wealth are somehow different, more intelligent, more privileged, more educated. But after observing financial lives across decades, professions, and income levels, one truth becomes clear. The difference is rarely intelligence, it is rarely access, it is almost always behavior. Wealth builders think differently, not because they were born that way, but because they trained themselves to respond to money in specific, disciplined ways. One of the most noticeable differences is how they relate to time. Wealth builders are comfortable delaying gratification. They understand that pleasure does not need to be immediate to be meaningful. While others ask what they can enjoy today, wealth builders quietly ask what they are building for tomorrow. They are willing to sacrifice convenience now for freedom later. This does not make them joyless. It makes them intentional. They know that short-term pleasure fades quickly, but long-term stability compounds. Another defining trait is emotional stability during financial storms. Markets rise and fall. Businesses face cycles. Income fluctuates. Where many panic and react impulsively, wealth builders remain calm. They do not pull out investments at the first sign of discomfort, nor do they make drastic decisions based on fear. They understand that cycles are not signals of failure. They are natural phases of growth. This calmness is not optimism, it is discipline rooted in understanding. Wealth builders also have a different relationship with appearance. They focus on cash flow, not image. They do not feel pressure to look successful before they are stable. Impressing others is not a financial goal, security is. They measure progress by sustainability, not by visible consumption. As a result, their money works quietly in the background, while others spend loudly in the foreground. Continuous learning is another cornerstone of the builder's mindset. Wealth builders never assume they already know enough. They stay curious. They pay attention to changes in tax rules, investment instruments, regulations, and opportunities. Not because they chase complexity, but because they understand that stagnation is dangerous. The financial world evolves, and those who stop learning slowly lose relevance. Builders remain students, regardless of age or status. Perhaps one of the most powerful traits is ownership. Wealth builders do not waste energy assigning blame. They do not fixate on the government, their employer, their upbringing, or their past mistakes. Acknowledging reality does not mean surrendering to it. Builders take responsibility for what they can control and work from there. This mindset gives them power. Blame feels comforting, but ownership produces results. They also think in systems rather than emotions. When faced with a financial challenge, they do not ask how they feel about it. They ask what structure can solve it permanently. They design processes that reduce reliance on willpower. Automation, routines, and clear rules replace impulse and reaction. Over time, these systems make progress feel almost effortless, not because it is easy, but because it is consistent. Above all, wealth builders believe that wealth is built slowly, intentionally, and with discipline. They do not chase hype. They are not seduced by shortcuts. They understand that sustainable wealth is boring in the short term and powerful in the long term. Consistency matters more than excitement. Direction matters more than speed. This mindset is not reserved for a select few. It can be learned, it can be practiced, and once adopted, it becomes a lifelong competitive advantage. Age does not disqualify anyone. Income does not determine eligibility. Background does not dictate outcome. What matters is the willingness to shift behavior, to stop reacting and start designing. When this mindset takes root, financial progress stops being accidental. It becomes deliberate, and from that point forward, wealth is no longer a matter of luck, but of alignment, patience, and discipline. 2.4 Filipino culture and how we relate to money. In the Philippines, money is one of the most powerful forces shaping family life. Yet it is also one of the least openly discussed. Conversations about money are often avoided, softened, or postponed, not because people do not care, but because they care too much about how they are perceived. Many Filipinos grow up learning that talking about money is uncomfortable. We fear being judged if we have too little. We fear being labeled greedy if we have too much. We feel embarrassed when we struggle and cautious when we succeed. We worry that openness might invite conflict, envy, or obligation. Silence feels safer. So families talk about everything else. Grades are discussed in detail. Relationships are monitored. Daily schedules are planned carefully. Meals are shared and stories are exchanged. But the one topic that could change the family's future, money, is often left untouched. This silence has consequences. When money is never discussed openly, patterns are never examined. Mistakes are repeated quietly from one generation to the next. Children grow up seeing outcomes but never understanding decisions. They inherit habits without context and beliefs without explanation. Wealth, when it appears, rarely lasts. Not because families are irresponsible, but because no one was taught how to talk about it honestly. Filipino culture also carries a deep sense of shared responsibility. Family does not end at the household. Financial obligations often extend outward to parents, siblings, relatives, and sometimes even neighbors. Helping is expected, sharing is admired, sacrifice is praised. These are beautiful traits. They reflect compassion, loyalty, and community. But without boundaries, generosity can quietly become self-destruction. Many people carry financial burdens far beyond what their income can sustain. They help not because they plan to, but because they feel they must. Saying no feels like betrayal. Yet each unplanned obligation weakens the foundation meant to support their own family. Over time, resentment grows, not because people are selfish, but because the pressure is unspoken and unresolved. Closely tied to this is the Filipino concept of haya. The desire to avoid embarrassment or conflict often prevents honest financial decisions. People agree to expenses they cannot afford. They lend money they need themselves. They avoid difficult conversations even when their situation is deteriorating. Pride keeps struggles hidden, while politeness keeps boundaries unclear. There is also a quiet fear surrounding success itself. In many communities, visible progress is treated with suspicion. People worry that success will attract envy, gossip, or hostility. Kung dato ka, mauso ka. Kuyawan ko ma-change ka. Daghan na ka enemies. These statements may sound casual, even humorous, but they carry a warning. Do not rise too high, or you will become a target. Over time, this creates fear around ambition. People learn to dim their progress, downplay their goals, or avoid growth altogether, not because they lack desire, but because success feels socially risky. Wealth becomes something to hide rather than build. Adding to this is the normalization of debt. Borrowing has become deeply woven into daily life. Loans are no longer seen as tools with consequences, but as default solutions. Debt is used not just for emergencies or investments, but for lifestyle, celebration, and emotional relief. When debt becomes cultural, its dangers become invisible. People stop asking whether borrowing makes sense and start asking only whether it is available. This combination, silence, obligation, haya, fear of success, and normalized debt, creates a powerful cultural current. It is not malicious. It is inherited, and it quietly limits how far families can go. The purpose of this book is not to reject Filipino values. It is to refine them. Helping others is a virtue, but it must be done wisely, not impulsively. Sharing is beautiful, but it must be sustainable, not sacrificial to the point of collapse. Family loyalty is sacred, but it should strengthen future generations, not trap them in cycles of quiet struggle. Financial literacy allows Filipino values to thrive, not disappear. It introduces clarity where silence once ruled. It teaches boundaries without selfishness, ambition without arrogance, and generosity without destruction. Breaking these cultural chains does not mean becoming less Filipino. It means becoming more intentional, so that compassion, family, and community are supported by stability rather than sustained by sacrifice alone. And when that shift happens, wealth stops being something to fear or hide. It becomes something that serves not just one person, but generations to come. Closing reflection of Chapter 2. Before you master money, you must understand yourself. Your money behavior is not a flaw. It is a story shaped by childhood, culture, fear, pressure, and dreams. But now, you are rewriting that story. You are shifting from unconscious patterns to conscious mastery, from emotional reactions to strategic decisions, from inherited beliefs to empowered beliefs. Today, you took the first step toward becoming the financial leader of your family. Action steps, behavioral reset. 1. Identify one money belief you inherited that no longer serves you. Write it down, acknowledge it, release it. 2. Identify your top emotional spending trigger. Stress, guilt, boredom, status. Awareness is the first cure. 3. Write your new financial identity. I am becoming a builder who uses systems, not emotions, to make decisions.